Welcome, Principal Matters podcast listeners. This is Dr. Jen Schwanke here talking with Tony Frontier. Dr. Frontier is an award-winning educator, author, and consultant who works with schools to improve curriculum, instruction, and assessment. A former teacher, associate principal, and curriculum director, he engages in research working with principals and teachers to develop engaging curriculum using effective instructional strategies, designing systems of teacher supervision that support reflective practice, and use data and assessment to improve student learning. You're a consultant with McTighe Associates and an ASCD faculty member. And Tony, I understand a lot of other things as well. You wear many, many hats. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And so, listeners, you should know that Tony and I were talking before this recording, and he started to go into so many meaty topics that I literally interrupted him. I said, stop. I have to hit record. So we are going to dig into that today. And the reason Tony and I found one another is a book coming out soon. By the time this episode airs, the book will be out. So I encourage all of our listeners to take a look at the book, AI with Intention. So Tony, tell us about the book. Tell us what you were saying to me about AI.
Great. Yeah. The essence of the book is AI is here, and we need to be intentional in how we use those tools. That means as principals, as leaders, right, we need to be sure we've got a clear vision and set of, opportunities in place for teachers, but also, opportunities and limitations and clarity for students to use AI tools. I've been conducting a host of focus groups in the last few weeks with high school students at a number of high schools, and they're using these tools, whether we tell them to or not. They're using these tools, and they're almost, I would use the word pleading for some clarity in how they can use these tools effectively.
Right. Right. I agree. I talk to high school students and they don't want to get in trouble. They just know that this tool is right there. And I think about a time a parent actually said to me, this was a couple of years ago, but she said, we have to stop AI. We have to keep it out of our schools. We have to make sure that our students don't use it. And I kind of chuckled and I said, too late. It's absolutely too late. So knowing this is a podcast for principals and knowing that you've talked to high school students who are, I love that word, pleading with, a little probably permission really to use the tools they know that are out there. What should principals be doing right now to build an understanding in their schools about AI and ensure that it supports that academic integrity we all value, but also deep learning?
Yeah, and that's precisely the challenge, right?
Right.
It's use versus, wise use versus intentional and effective use. One of the things that's really struck me is a lot of the things I hear students saying about AI tools and what their teachers are telling them about AI tools are things that were true 6 or 3 years ago.
Right. Right.
And so it's so important that principals stay attuned to how these tools can be used and when there are updates. And I think one of the most important things to keep in mind about AI tools, this is not something that you have to be a techie to understand or use. The essence of AI tools is that they are responsive to natural language. So when we're given the opportunity to use new tools, we typically apply old strategies.
Mm-hmm.
So, we shouldn't be surprised when kids use AI tools to plug in their homework questions and get answers. That's kind of their view of how technology works, right? It's this kind of one-way thing. I plug in a prompt, it gives something back, and that completely misses, the interactive opportunities. So I really encourage principals, not only to play, and I mean that, there are no penalties for trying again with an AI tool, But to play with the tools for your own work, right? How can you create effectiveness and efficiency and automaticity? But to go in and try to build some lesson plans or assessments using standards and see what teachers might see.
Right.
And when I say AI tools, grab Gemini or latest version of ChatGPT, one of the reasoning models. Um, there are a lot of products out there, and I talk about some processes you can use in the book to discern, kind of what's trendy or what's buzzy versus what's effective.
Right.
But all those tools you're purchasing are built on those core models anyway. So,
Right.
but then for principals also to go in and play with those tools like you are a student, and to think about AI tools not as a super Google or a crutch, but think about it as a tutor or someone you can dialogue with, or I said someone, it, it's a technical resource. It's not a person,
Right.
but go in there, take a topic that maybe you haven't thought about as a high school teacher or a middle school teacher. Um, in a long time, or maybe pick a topic that you struggled with when you were in high school and
Right.
just start asking it questions, right? I'm a student, I'm trying to learn about Pythagorean theorem or the difference between mitosis and meiosis, right? Whatever it may be. And just sit there and try to have a conversation with the tools. I think I, I I can't tell how many times my jaw has dropped when I've approached AI tools that way, or some of the strategies I talk about in my book AI with Intention. Upload an assessment and then upload some standards and say, critique this assessment. How is it well aligned to the standards? Where are there gaps? I've been shocked at how, and I've done that with dozens and dozens of different assessments. I've been shocked at how effectively it gives good feedback.
Right. I have two thoughts swimming around in my head as you're speaking. One is you were giving some advice to principals about how they can, what they can do. And what I would also point out is what you started with, which is I've been doing some focus groups with students. Principals need to be doing that. They need to be talking to their kids and pulling them. I live with two high schoolers, and one of them said to me not too long ago, Mom, we all know about AI. We're not sure our
So
teachers know that we know.
right, right. And I'm sorry, I froze there. I
Oh, did you?
apologize. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So
So
is
I'll start again. Emily,
thanks.
edit out wherever you need to. Tony, as you're talking, there's a couple of topics swimming around in my head. The first is what you started with, which is focus groups with high schoolers. And so I would also think that an action step for principals is talk to kids. Ask them, what are you thinking? What are you doing? I live with two high schoolers, one of whom said to me a couple weeks ago, Mom, we all know about AI. We all know how to use it, but we don't know that our teachers know that we know. And so that's the first thing we need to do is pull off that pretend mask we're wearing and say, okay, kids, what are you doing anyway? So that we can kind of catch up. And then the sister thought to that is I think about how we mangled the cell phone problem. When cell
Yes,
phones came out, we kind of said, all right, kids, well, we can't stop it. So go ahead. Well, now we're trying to walk it back, and it's being walked back with state legislation and it's being walked back with policy, but it was never intentional and it was never an agreement between students, families, and school. Okay, it's a tool. It's not going anywhere. How are we going to do this?
absolutely. And I've been thinking of that so much lately. I was just saying to a group of teachers the other day that almost that exact point, but it's the social media piece, right? Like social media came and you know, absolutely. Some groups like organizations like ISTE and talk about guidelines for, but it was almost like, well, that's for the technology teacher to talk
Right.
about. No, we can't pretend like when kids have access to tools or resources that we know, right? They're spending hours and hours and hours on. That needs to be as much a part of the curriculum as anything. And what I think is particularly challenging about AI tools is we need to prepare for and address the impact of when kids can sit down at a tool, right, and type in a question or a prompt or a homework assignment, and they see that answer come back, right, typed at 100 words a minute, that changes the essence of what they misconceptions they already hold about what it means to learn, right? I mean, learning is effortful, learning is intentional, learning takes time. And we've got to be empathetic to our students, see our classrooms right through their eyes, as Hattie reminds us, and just accept that if students are using AI tools to do their work, it's because for the last 10,000 years, humans have used tools to
Tools.
accomplish work with greater efficiency, right? Work of value with greater efficiency. So if what they perceive to be of value is getting her done, getting the points, turning her in,
Right.
it's perfectly logical that that's how they would use those tools. Um, but if that's not the purpose, right? Something I know you talk about a lot in your work. If the purpose of school is not to just complete tasks, but to learn, we can't, we can't pretend like AI tools aren't happening.
Right.
So
Well, and I think hear and see a lot of fear from teachers about being obsolete. And so, for example, I had an English teacher say to me, kids aren't going to need to learn to write anymore. They're not going to need to write. And I said, that may be true. I truly don't know. I can't see that far ahead. But what I do know is they're really going to need to be able to read and comprehend.
yes.
Because if they ask this tool to write something for them and it is gorgeous, every comma's in the right place, they're using even semicolons correctly. But what does it say? And does it say what you wanted it to say? Because that, to me, the comprehension piece and the intentionality, like you just said, becomes much more critical. There's no way around the fact that we still have to know what we're saying when AI helps us say it.
Yep, precisely. And an example that I would share related to that, because I think you're spot on. But I started my career teaching middle school, but I spent 14 years teaching doctoral students and learning theory and curriculum design, and but I also taught statistics, and we used SPSS, which is a really high-end statistical package that is used. And SPSS, I mean, it will do the math. I mean, unbelievably complex math with
Hmm.
unbelievably complex data sets. But if you don't understand, right, but what does the output mean? Right? Did I set this up in a way that is valid, reliable? Can I interpret the output, or is it just gobbledygook? So just as you said, when we have tools that can do some of that cognitive heavy lifting, it doesn't mean humans can or should. No, it doesn't mean humans no longer need to be in the loop. What it often does is it shifts the role and the expertise that humans need to bring to the loop. So absolutely, in an era where it will be easier to generate information, right? We're already just drowning in information. But in an era where it's even easier to generate information and disinformation and misinformation, right? Kids have to have a really robust set of strategies to say, what does this
Right.
really mean? What's the source, et cetera.
Right. Well, and I think that's critical too. We've talked a lot about ways that principals can connect with the students to see what they're doing, but principals also need to be using these tools. When they first came out, I was rolling my eyes. I'm like, I am a good writer. I will never use AI to write an email for me. Well, guess who loves to use AI to write emails? I do, because it is so you can use the tool to just polish it, to refine it, to write it. And my hands are still in the dirt with this email, right? I'm
Hmm.
still
Hmm.
absolutely thinking about what I want to say and if it says it right. But boy, it's exactly like you said. We've been using tools for many years, and it would be silly to pretend this tool isn't out there.
Yep, absolutely.
So you have
Absolutely.
a ton of other work though. We don't want to just have our listeners think Tony's the AI guy. You have several other books, and I want you to be able to talk with our listeners with about any of those books. But I want to talk about Teaching with Clarity, another work that you've done. And
Hmm.
in that book, you really stress the importance of prioritizing and doing less so students understand more. So, to principals, how can we support teachers in narrowing that focus without feeling like they're sacrificing some important learning? Talk to us about that book and what we can learn from it.
Yeah, yeah. And where I'd start my answer to that question is just the importance of discerning coverage versus teaching for understanding. So
Mhm.
pulling on some of, Grant Wiggins, Jay McTighe's understanding by design work. Um, uh, Teaching is easy. Now, before you turn off the podcast, let me finish that statement. All right. If teaching is telling kids about a bunch of stuff, teaching is easy. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of legislatures and
Mhm.
seem to think teaching is.
Correct.
Um, but if teaching means right, creating conditions where kids have the time and opportunity to be responsive to feedback and want to learn and see possibility in what we're right, then teaching is really, really hard. So anything worth investing significant amounts of instructional time in, um, eh, it there are things where we have to go deep, right? We want kids um, to change as a result of participating in our classes, right? We want them to see the world with more complexity, to understand themselves more deeply, to appreciate what it means to write well or think like a mathematician, et cetera. Right? And those things are difficult to do. The only way to do those right, is to be clear about priorities. Again, you're some of the work you talk about with teachers, right? Priorities and purpose.
Yep, yep.
My kids need to understand the purpose of a course is to engage in productive struggle. And we're going to revisit complex skills and complex conceptual understandings, again and again, because that's what's most important. So what that means then is, we need to be really clear um, about what it means to understand, what's most important to understand, and what we're going to accept as evidence of those important understandings. So when I say what it means to understand, right, it's pulling on some of the research around surface level knowledge, deeper understanding and transfer. Um, if kids see school as a game where you tell me stuff for a couple of weeks and I report it back to you at the end of those 2 weeks, then we move on to the next thing. Um, they're doing school, but they're not learning. So what are those bigger conceptual pieces? What are those deeper ways of thinking and understanding that we really want our kids to walk away with? We can't teach those things in a lesson. We can't even teach those in a unit. We need to really intentionally keep coming back to those bigger
Right.
skills and strategies. Um, so how do we get there? Um, one way that I think is really useful to think about how we prioritize and how we need to prioritize in schools, in teaching with clarity. I talk about the distinction between classical music and jazz music, and classical music is an example of a system where if you have a lot of people who already have really complex understanding and complex right set of skills to play the exact right note in the exact right way at the exact right time, it sounds amazing, right? It sounds absolutely
Yeah.
amazing. Um, we sometimes we try to treat schools like this. It's like we, as leaders, we need to control like the curriculum and what gets taught and when, and we've got to make sure that that's just impossible to do, right? It's kind of like asking a classical music, it's like asking an orchestra to perform without any music in front of them and with no time to rehearse. So a better approach that I argue for is a jazz approach, and the essence of jazz is clarity and consistency and a commitment to just a handful of shared agreements, right? And I'm a musician as well, but right, what's the chord progression? What's the tempo? What what mode are we in, who's comping and who's soloing, right? And with those five things, you can unleash unbelievable creativity. But we've got to be clear about, right, what's the essence here? Because if we're really clear, for example, if we're really clear around a shared set of success criteria, a shared, really clear, limited set of standards, um, now we can create systems where we say this is the goal, this is where we're headed, this is where our students need to be at the end of each course, each um, you know, discipline. How you
Right.
get there is up to you, but we're all accountable to these handful of core agreements.
Well, and sometimes you need classical and sometimes you need jazz. And
Sure.
I think that's important. I talked to a math teacher not too long ago and she said, like anything in education, our pendulum went way too far with mathematics
Hmm.
where we're like, figure it out, sit down, here's some blocks, put them together. But you still need to know 6 times 4 is 24 every single time. And that, I would argue, would be your classical music. The exact right answer at the right time just because that's what
Hmm.
it is.
Hmm.
But then you also need that creativity, and I think our teachers are desperate for that because nobody
Yeah.
does well when they're told you cannot deviate from this classical truth, if you will.
Right. Right.
So how do you see successful principals navigating that tension between ensuring standards are met and giving teachers that freedom to be creative? What are some strategies you believe work?
Yeah, I think being clear
Mhm.
around the purpose of a given course and the success criteria that are central to that course. So that could include things like in writing, some shared rubrics, right,
Right.
within a department. It can include shared rubrics or scales for success criteria for reading, or the math practices, or the science practices. Um, because if it's the backward design piece, right? If we're not clear about those end components and what's our purpose and what are our priorities, then we really can fall in that space where it's like, well, anything goes. Well, we'll trust your professional judgment. And my
Mhm.
response there is, physicians have a lot of professional judgment, but they can't they can't just make up their own assessments or
Right.
success criteria, right?
Right.
If 120 over 80 is a criterion for quality blood pressure, um, it's not a physician's prerogative to say, well,
Not today.
whatever you want, right? Whatever. The physician's expertise is, if that isn't happening, right? What advice and what course of action does my expertise help you, right, pursue?
Right.
And I think that's very similar to a useful way of thinking about how do we support teachers, right? But support teachers within the context of some boundaries. And
Right.
when I talk about assessment, I don't mean the tests kids take 3 days a year. I frankly couldn't care less about the assessments kids take 3 days a year. But I really care a lot about the assessments kids take the other 177
Mhm.
days a year, right?
Right.
Because that's that point of contact between the child and the teacher and classroom assessment evidence. Those are by far the most powerful
Right.
tools kids and teachers can use to work together.
Exactly. Exactly. So, that is a beautiful segue to my question about your book that has what I think might be the best all-time title ever, Making Teachers Better, Not Bitter. I love that. Love that title. And in that book, you talk about the balance between evaluation, supervision, reflection. How can principals think about making teachers better, not bitter?
Yeah, and I wrote that book with Paul Milkey, who's a great superintendent here in Wisconsin. We talk about the distinction among systems or components that are in place to uh, support teacher expertise and build their capacity to be reflective, versus systems in place to evaluate, right? Versus systems that are well, purely around teacher reflection. And the big idea is this: as principals, there's 10,000 things to tend to, right? From the urgent to the important to the educational to the societal, and just so much complexity there. Um, if you can do enough classroom visits to actually give a valid, reliable measure or evaluation of your teachers, you're doing amazing work. But to pretend like you can give a teacher enough feedback to help them improve, you're kidding yourself, because one set of summative feedback at the end of the year, or two or three, right, series of feedback throughout the year, that's just not enough to change someone's learning. So how do we build and support systems, first of all, where it's okay to demonstrate that you are growing and you're a work in progress, and to model, that growth mindset, essentially for your teachers. Um, but then create conditions and opportunities where teachers can do things, strong coaching programs designed on supporting expertise, mentoring programs designed to build more of those logistical, right, components of how do we get things done here. Um, and for create those contexts where, most powerfully, I've seen in schools, and some schools have done from the work in making teachers better not bitter, doing instructional rounds, for example, not because the principals are coming in to gather data, but because we've created a context where teachers can come in and observe others, right? Teaching is such an isolated profession. If the culture of the school is, when another adult comes in your room, they're there to judge you, it's not going to work. So how do we create that culture where um, it's okay, right, to come in and visit so I can learn from what I see, not because I'm there to judge you. Asking students for feedback, that could be surveys, that could be end of unit uh, questions on assessments. What did I do in this unit that supported your learning? What's something you wish I would have done differently? Questions like that, right? Of students. If 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 all of those types of things are seen as being evaluative, right, then we've made that mistake of kind of creating a state assessment that we think is going to help our teachers grow. Just doesn't work that way.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about, you've mentioned systems several times, and it was not
Hmm.
too long ago, embarrassingly not too long ago, where I had an epiphany. I had been the one walking around for years, both as a teacher and a principal, saying, hire good people and get out of their way. And this epiphany came when I thought, no, we have really good people that are being squashed by bad systems. And we have people who maybe aren't as skilled or experienced or talented, if you will, that are doing really, really well because the system is strong. And as you're talking about walkthroughs and evaluations, I'm thinking about, this might be a book you need to write, Tony, about the intersectionality between culture and systems. There's a lot of work out there. I've done a lot of it about culture. And there's a lot of work about systems, although it doesn't tend to be in the education space. What about these systems, from a principal's perspective? What are some practical ways that we can implement systemic changes without compromising culture?
Great. Yeah, yeah. Two big bins I'd put that in. First,
Hmm.
being aware of what is the type of change you're trying to create or support. In Five Levers to Improve Learning, I'm really in all my work, I talk about the notion of status quo management, right? Sometimes we just need to make sure things roll over, and
Right.
right, the calendar rolls over, and the buses arrive on time. Status quo management. Then there's transactional change. Sometimes we need to give people different incentives. Um, they need to apply existing skills to new tools or resources, and it's pretty linear, right? sometimes we need to engage in transformational change, right? That's where we need to step back and acknowledge that this isn't a status quo problem. And if we treat this like a transactional problem, we still won't be able to support people the way they need to be supported. So, for example, let's say some of the challenges we're talking about with teacher supervision and evaluation, right, are occurring. Well, if we just roll in a new system and create new paperwork or create new, a new Google file folder,
Right.
um, what's really changed, right? If people's mental model of if an like I said before, and if someone else is in my room, they're there to judge me. Right? So how do we get to the root? And there's, a set of transformational leadership looks different than transactional leadership, right? Transformational, it's relational. We need to ask big questions. We need to acknowledge we don't have all the answers. It's about visioning, but it's also about, right, that action plan. But it's stepping back far enough to say some of the assumptions we've made in the past aren't going to work into the future. So that's one piece that leaders can, really think intentionally about the magnitude of change and the behaviors. But then the second piece is where do we reach for leverage? And Jim Rickabaugh and I talk about this in Five Levers to Improve Learning. Um, Oftentimes, the changes that are most visible and evident in schools are related to what we talk about as structure and sample, right? Changing the schedule, kind of reshuffling which kids go where throughout the day. Um, and those components are often and of themselves can be limiting factors, certainly, to supporting change. Um, but rarely are they kind of the key that unlocks the door.
Hmm.
More typically, what we really want to change is or support is, how do we use clear standards to support student learning or standards for student teaching, right? What are those articulated expectations for quality? What are the strategies we are using as leaders, or the strategies that teachers are using in the classroom? And then conceptions of self. What do kids believe to be true about their capacity to learn? What do teachers believe to be true about their capacity to teach? What do I believe to be true about my capacity to lead? So what happens then is we can fall into a space where we start with a good vision, right, of a transformational opportunity or a goal. Like we want teachers to have the opportunities to collaborate, right, more effectively, or we want kids to be more engaged, or we want to increase achievement. But then somewhere along the lines, as we engage in that change process, we fall back on kind of those more transactional um, structure and sample types of things. So, right, we want more opportunities for collaboration. We end up with late starts or early
Right.
release.
Right.
We wanted more engagement. We ended up with a block schedule. We
Right.
wanted better achievement. We ended up with a new textbook. But too often, those more cultural components, we can change those already, right? We don't have to go to the board
Right.
to ask for permission to give help our teachers develop some strategies to collaborate more effectively, right?
Right.
So we need to be, it's that intentionality piece of what's the change we're really trying to make.
Right. Right.
A lot of times the big school shift, it's obvious, it's apparent, but sometimes that's the least efficient way. It's that
Right.
one-on-one with others that
Right.
we need to best support.
Right. When you adopt a new textbook or you have a different master schedule, it feels like you've done something, right? That makes
Yes.
us feel better, but it doesn't necessarily truly change the practice you were trying to hone in on. Um, okay, I have about 85 more questions, but we're going to run out of time. So I do actually want to ask you a question. You referenced you were a musician,
Mhm.
and listeners, there, behind Tony, as we're doing this interview, there's some beautiful paintings or photographs of,
Photography. I'm a photographer as
yeah.
well.
Oh,
Yeah.
so an artist, my friends. We were talking to an artist. So, I quite frankly think there's not enough artists leading education. There's a lot of mathematicians and scientists and historians, but talk to me about how an artistic perspective can help school leaders think about supporting teachers and students. And here's why I'm asking this question. I did an executive coaching session with someone who was trained as a musician. She was a music teacher. She was leading a performance arts school, and she said, "I just don't know that I will be able to lead effectively."
Mhm.
And I said, "No, no, 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 no. You are it. You're what we need." So talk to me about that, about artists as leaders and supporting teachers and students.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you. Um, yeah, a few things there. Think about the arts. Think about the arts in school, or think about a music teacher or a drama teacher, right? They understand that at the end of this semester, or the end of, right, 2,000 people are going to come to the auditorium and watch every single one of their students perform live in real time, right?
Right. Right.
That notion in the arts of, it's not just about product, it's about process, right? How do we build enough skill and capacity for our students to work together in ways that demonstrate their expertise? That notion again of being really clear about our goals and what's most important, making learning or skills or performances visible, giving the opportunity for kids to see that the work that they do is valued and of value to the public. Those are really powerful ways, right, to build in motivation from jump. um,
Right.
and then some of the other metaphors around a conductor is the only one on stage who doesn't make a sound. And we've got to be clear about where we're going. We've got to be
Right.
flexible in, right, how people get there, etc. And a quick example of that I would share about how I've been using AI tools personally, because I think it's relevant. Um, there's been a lot of concerns expressed, and I agree with these concerns, right, about AI tools being used to make music, right?
Uh-huh.
So I can sit down and type in a few prompts and produce, quote unquote, write a song, right?
Right.
It's really the AI tool writing the song. But I think for a lot of people, if you gave them an AI tool and said make some music, well, that's what they would do, right? It's very goal oriented. What's the most efficient way we can make this happen? Um, a way I've been using AI tools as a musician, there's some amazing tools out there where you can take a song uh, through AI. You can then break that song into its component parts. So it separates out the drums from the bass, from the guitar, from the vocals. Absolutely amazing. Then you can isolate those individual tracks. I'm primarily a piano player. So now if I'm learning a piece or trying to learn a piece, kind of as it's played, right now I can just hear that in isolation, right? So I've taken this really complex thing, breaking it into smaller pieces. But then the other thing that some of these new tools can do is I can slow down that piano piece without it changing the pitch, which is a problem typically when you're trying to slow down, right? So that notion of taking something complex, I can break it into smaller pieces. I can now use it in a way that's appropriate for my current level of skill, right, my current level of need. um, I think that's really good metaphor for how we need to help kids see and understand how AI tools can work. It's
Right.
not just your assignment is to write a song, they type a single sentence prompt and they're done. It's your task is to become a better musician or mathematician or scientist, and the potential is really amazing there.
So that's such a rich and important metaphor. Again, two thoughts I have about that. First of all, in terms of musicians and artists being able to lead. I have never, ever in my career found somebody who's more capable of handling massive amounts of people with calm and poise than a music teacher, an art teacher, a PE teacher, a media special,
Yeah.
whatever.
Drama teacher, yes.
Nobody does it better. Like I stand on the sidelines at Friday night football games and I watch the band the band leader because I'm like, how do they just and again, metaphorically, but also literally, they'll take anyone. They'll take any kid.
Yep.
You know what? You want to try the flute? You come on in here, we'll try the flute or we'll see where it goes. So that's a huge important metaphor. And then the second piece I want to, and this will close the loop on AI. Um, I think as you were talking, I was imagining you playing the piano. I was imagining you doing this work with AI, pulling the pieces apart, slowing it down, not changing the pitch. But I also think about my dad is a musician and he
Hmm.
plays the fiddle, he plays the piano, he plays several other instruments. He doesn't have to use AI. It reminds me a little bit of that great phrase in the recovery community of take what you need and leave the rest.
Mm-hmm.
None of us have to use AI. You can sit down your piano right now,
Oh yeah,
Tony,
yeah.
and you don't have to even think about AI. You can play a beautiful piece and it can fill your soul and fill the music, fill the house with music. Or you can say, let's get clinical and scientific about this. Let's see what AI says. So I think that's an important takeaway too. We started this episode saying AI is here. Let's not ignore it. But we also are still human beings with free thought and autonomy, and
Absolutely.
AI can be used if we need it or want it. It does not mean, it has to move in with us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. One of the biggest pieces of using the tools effectively is knowing which tool to
Exactly.
use when and knowing when you don't need a
Exactly.
tool at all.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Exactly. So, okay, listeners, we are out of time, which just stinks because I feel like we could go on and on and on. Listeners, you can check the show notes for this episode. There's lots of places to find Dr. Tony Frontier, and I will put all of those links in there. I'll also put all the links to some of his writing, to several of his books. Anywhere, any final words or anywhere that you want people to know to find you, Tony?
Yeah, two things. You can just, shoot me an email at tonyfrontier@gmail.com, the website, tonyfrontier.com. But recently started a new venture with First Education Resources, which Garth Larson founded, who's been on your podcast a few
Right.
times. But it's First Education Resources AI Center for Effective Teaching and Learning. And AI there stands for artificial intelligence, but it also stands for aligned and intentional teaching and student agency and integrity, because those last four things are the things that really matter most in how those tools are used. But thanks for the opportunity to talk with you. I really do
Yeah,
appreciate it.
it's so fun. So, listeners, I hope you push the little rewind button and listen to the other ways that AI can be defined with students. Thank you, Dr. Tony Frontier, so much for your time. I cannot wait for our principals to hear your perspectives.
Thank you. Thank you very much.